All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. All right, you guys, on the line, I've got Julian Assange's brother, Gabriel Shipton. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Very happy to have you here. And listen, last night I watched this new documentary that you guys are touring around the country screening. It's called Ithaca. And it's the story of your brother's imprisonment, but also especially your father's, and I guess your effort to get him sprung from the Belmarsh prison where he's in Britain right now, I guess awaiting a ruling on an appeal over an American extradition request. They want to prosecute your brother under the Espionage Act. So I guess, can we start with that? Where exactly are we in the process? Because the movie ends with a big win, but it wasn't a big enough one.
Yeah, so Julian is coming up to his fourth year in Belmarsh Maximum Security Prison just outside of London. That'll be 4 years on the 11th of April. He's there. He's not serving a sentence. He's not convicted. He's what they call a remand prisoner. There's two remand prisoners in that prison out of 800 prisoners. 20% of those 800 are convicted murderers. So that's just a idea of the sort of people that are in that prison. These are the most dangerous, most violent criminals in the UK, and Julian's been kept there amongst them as an innocent man. So on June 17 last year, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, signed off on his extradition order, and Julian has one more avenue of appeal in the UK High Courts. And so he's submitted his application to appeal at the beginning of November, and now he's waiting on the UK courts to decide whether they will hear the appeal or whether they will agree with the signed extradition order from Priti Patel. So there could be a decision any moment now from the UK courts. So it's these times for Julian when he has this sort of sword hanging over his neck of a impending extradition. They're very tough, very full of anxiety and uncertainty for him and for his family.
Tell me, Gabriel, is he still on so-called suicide precautions and 23-hour-a-day solitary lockdown and all that stuff?
He spends most of the time in his cell. He does get exercise now. He leaves his cell to get food as well. So the conditions have improved from when he was in the solitary confinement. And interestingly, and I think this is a sort of sign of how things change in Julian's case, it wasn't his lawyers, it wasn't pressure from government officials, it wasn't pressure from the UN that changed his conditions. It was 3 petitions done by the prisoners that led to Julian being moved out of that solitary confinement condition. So that just sort of speaks so loudly to me that a change in Julian's situation is going to come from the ground up and not from the top down.
That's interesting. I'd never heard that. It was the prisoners themselves said it's not fair the way you're singling out this guy, and they did so in an organized enough fashion that actually made a difference?
Yeah, that's right. And so all the lawyers, even the UN, weren't able to do it. But the prisoners inside the prison all banding together were able to, pressure the prison to make the change.
That's really something else. That's really great to hear too. Um, okay, I'm sorry. This is a side point, but I wanted to ask you, why is the title Ithaca?
Well, Ithaca. So when John and I were on the road, or are on the road, there's a lot of the times that things don't go our way. In the film, or I guess one of those moments was, after Julian won at the magistrates court level, and then a few days later had his bail rejected. So that was a sort of very low moment for us. And John would listen to this poem by a Greek Egyptian poet called Cavaphy, and the poem is called Ithaca. There's a great reading on YouTube by Sean Connery, and it explains, or it's really about when you're fighting for something, fighting for a cause that's bigger than yourself, or reaching for a goal that seems out of reach. Just to remember that, it's even when you reach that goal, it's and you find it, and I think the line in the poem is, if you arrive at Ithaca and you find her poor, worry not, because you arrive there rich, with all the things you've learnt, all the places you've been, and all the friends you've made along the way. So at the low moments in the campaign, it's important to remember that, it's just about taking one step at a time, and this movement is building around Julian, and that's why we chose that title, because it's that sort of allegory for activism, or when you're fighting for a cause bigger than yourself. There's also a part of it that talks about fear, and the fears that you bring along inside you, and to ignore those fears. And so I think that's very important in this fight as well, considering who we're up against.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I'm really glad I asked you that. And you're definitely right about, silver linings here. It's not that it's worth it at his expense or anything, but new relationships and networks and activist groups and movements are being built up around this. We can see who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, and who's willing to stick up for Assange and WikiLeaks.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, what's a sort of unforeseen benefit that's come from Julian's persecution is now there's a worldwide movement for democratic rights and freedom of expression and the First Amendment are all around the world. Julian once said that he wanted to export the First Amendment to the rest of the world. And I think through the fight to free him, we are seeing that happening. There's parliamentary groups or congressional groups, cross-party groups in every Western democracy now, all calling for Julian's freedom. And it's not just because of the violations of Julian's human rights, but what is at stake for everyone in these countries as well. They see this fight to free Julian as a fight for their own rights, a fight for their own press freedom and freedom of expression. So, as we travel around, we meet more and more people who are, are very concerned and join the movement, and I think that's a unforeseen benefit that's come to everybody through this fight to free Julian.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so in the movie, Nils Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur, or however you say that, on torture, he makes an important statement in there. Well, he says lots of important things, but one of them is, this was never supposed to be about Julian Assange. Not if you ask Julian Assange. This is about the documents that he's posting online. This is about the journalism. This is about the outlet for whistleblowers to tell the truth about crimes that the governments they work for are committing. And so I want to give you a chance to talk about the Iraq and Afghan war logs, the State Department cables, the Guantanamo files, the DNC and Podesta leaks, and all the other stuff. I mean, Vault 7, but not just that. I mean, there are leaks on wikileaks.org from governments all over the world, and including enemies of the war party too, like Syria and Russia, even though people always deny that and try to say that Assange, is somehow an agent of these states that are enemies of the United States. That's not true. He's published all kinds of stuff about them too. But a lot of people maybe don't even know. I mean, his biggest hit was 10 years ago, right? Or more, right? 2010, 12, 13 years ago. And then, of course, 2016 was a big deal. So people maybe are more familiar with that. But go ahead and talk a little bit about WikiLeaks and about Assange's mission here, if you could, Gabriel.
Well, it sort of stems, in the film, we have a look at sort of how it really developed around the WikiLeaks. The concept for WikiLeaks really developed around the Iraq War and the big lie around the Iraq War, the weapons of mass destruction that we all knew didn't exist, but were kept getting told by the prestige media and government officials that's why Iraq had to be invaded. So Julian saw that problem, that populations didn't like wars, and they have to be convinced to endorse them or lie to convince these populations to not resist them. And so Julian saw that problem and identified that this conspiracy between government and between prestige media to push these policies, these dangerous policies that aren't actually good for populations. The more money we're spending on the war machine, the less that goes, to social causes or that people can keep in their pockets. And so it was around that WikiLeaks was developed to disrupt those conspiracies and take decentralize that leaking, decentralize those leaks away from the prestige media and make them accessible to everybody. And by doing so, protecting leakers and increasing the impact of leaks, but also protecting journalists, because journalists no longer had to protect their sources because WikiLeaks became the sort of outsourced or decentralized source protection. And that is why, I think a good comparison that has been made is, Chelsea Manning, the leaker of the Iraq war files, the Afghanistan war logs, the torture at Guantanamo Bay, the famous collateral murder video that shows a helicopter gunship gunning down two Reuters journalists and then also gunning down the people who come to rescue them. That is why Chelsea Manning is free and had her sentence commuted in 2017, but Julian remains in prison, and I think that is quite a telling fact that what do these people fear most, and it is WikiLeaks and Julian and the system that he created to bring this information to the population that those in power fear the most.
Yeah. All right. Now, so the movie mostly features your dad and also Julian Assange's wife, Stella Morris, and their effort traveling all around, talking to parliaments, talking to private groups, talking to, I don't know, whoever they can in order to try to get Assange freed. So first of all, can you tell us a little bit about Jonathan and tell us a little bit about Stella, and then, maybe a little bit more about the travels and travails here?
Well, what we wanted to, show in Ithaca is that, John and Stella, they're just, they're doing these amazing, courageous things, but, at the end of the day, then they're normal people like you and I. They're, John's a retired builder. Stella is a human rights lawyer, but also, a wife and a mother. And they are normal people who do these extraordinary things. And so we wanted to show that in the film, show their personal journey and follow them as they fight to free Julian, in the hope that it can inspire more people to embark on these extraordinary journeys. But we sort of, in the film, we follow them, and Stella, when we began filming, Stella was still, Julian's secret family. She hadn't come forward, and nobody knew that she really existed other than one of Julian's legal team. And it was during the filming and during the court proceedings that Judge Baretza at the Magistrates Court refused to redact her name from court documents. And so Stella was forced to sort of take control of that, and she came out and did interviews for 60 Minutes and different programs, and really took control of that, and now has become one of Julian's greatest advocates, and a sort of an activist and human rights defender in her own right. So that was one of the really sort of a curveball that we were thrown during the filming, that we had to, we had this new person on the scene. It wasn't just John fighting for Julian, it was now Stella as well, and we were able to capture all that, and I think that works so well in the film.
Yeah, that's great. Hey guys, check out my new sponsor. It's Peace Hawk Coffee at peacehawk.coffee. First of all, business. You have to drink coffee in the morning, and you want it to taste good. Well, Peace Hawk Coffee is the best from around the world. But then, just as important, Peace Hawk Coffee donates at least $1 of every pound sold to worthy foreign aid organizations like Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation. When you buy Peace Hawk Coffee, you're not only buying great coffee, you have a chance to support the economies of countries struggling against the effects of war and support private aid foundations doing life-saving work abroad. Sign up for their email list and get yourself some great coffee at peacehawk.coffee. Hey y'all, Scott Horton here for the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org. I'm the director. Then we've got Sheldon Richman, Kyle Anzalone, Keith Knight, Lori Calhoun, Jim Bovard, Connor Freeman, Will Porter, Patrick McFarlane, and Tommy Salmons on our staff, writing and podcasting. And we've also got a ton of other great writers too, like Walter Block, Richard Booth, Boss Spleet, Kim Robinson, and William Van Wagenen. We've published 8 books so far, including my latest, Hotter Than the Sun, Time to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, and Keith Knight's new Voluntarist Handbook. And we've got quite a few more great ones coming soon. Check out libertarianinstitute.org/books. It's a whole new era. We libertarians don't have the power, but we do have enough influence to try to lead the left and the right to make things right. Join us at libertarianinstitute.org. And then, there are scenes in there where they're meeting with, I guess, different parliaments in Europe and with UN officials and this and that. Can you talk a little bit more about the effort on the ground that they've been making here? You all have been. I know you're behind the camera, I guess, here.
Yeah, so they've been advocating, all around the world, from 3 continents, Australia, Europe, and the US. Meeting with parliamentarians in many European countries, and forming these sort of coalescing these groups in Parliament. For example, in Australia, there is now an official parliamentary, what they call a Parliamentary Friends of Julian Assange group, that has over 50 parliamentarians, over a quarter of the Australian Parliament. And so when John started advocating for Julian, there was only 2 parliamentarians, and now they're up to 50. And that really speaks to what I was talking about before, this sort of worldwide movement for freedom of expression that has developed through the fight to free Julian. But it's up to John and Stella to really change the narrative around Julian's case. And I think we show that in the film by a lot of the interactions they have with a mostly, antagonistic prestige media, channels like the BBC or CNN, interviews that John and Stella do with them, and sort of countering the 10 years of demonization and dehumanization that Julian suffered, that was sort of put in place to allow this unprecedented Espionage Act prosecution to move forward. It was this tactic to really give Julian the ick factor, so that people didn't think that he had a right to due process or human rights, or his right to asylum that was taken from him, freedom of movement that's been taken from him. But that was all possible through this demonization. This 10 years of Julian being called, narcissistic, or doesn't feed his cat, or didn't wash his dishes. Like, why does this matter? And I think Nils Melzer says in the film, Julian shone the light on their crimes, and the tactic that was used against him was they turned the light around and pointed on Julian. But at the end of the day, it's their war crimes, their corruption, and their torture that we need to remember and that we need to keep the focus on.
Yeah. Well, and also the betrayal by the rest of the media. And this is something that Andrew Coburn had written about a couple of weeks ago in Harper's Magazine, is, they're all a bunch of Charlie Savages, the disgraced New York Times reporter who's, put a few thousand words into his effort to explain why Julian Assange isn't a real journalist like he is. Because what he does is he repeats whatever the CIA wants him to repeat. And what Assange does is he publishes CIA documents that they did not want published. And so that's why Charlie Savage has a job and Julian Assange is in prison. But of course, it just speaks to Charlie Savage's guilt, and it goes to show that he sold his soul so cheaply, he doesn't even know how badly he indicts himself when he writes that way about Julian Assange. That's right. Savage, you're nothing like Julian Assange. We all agree with that. And that is such a huge, important part of the story, is all these people throwing this man under the bus, when what's at stake here is whether the government can prosecute journalists and publishers rather than just leakers, but leakees under the Espionage Act. And they've never gotten away with this before, and they're trying to get away with it now. As Coburn pointed out, only very last minute here did the New York Times, I'm sure with no help from Savage, but the New York Times, The Guardian, and a couple of others finally wrote this letter in support of Assange after, the example's been made and after he's been punished without trial this whole time. And I guess they feel like, now that he's been punished enough, they want to go ahead and try to intervene a little bit before they're actually threatened. It's pretty disgusting behavior, so we'll note it. But now, let me ask you about Nils Melzer some more and about the state of Assange's health here. And talk about in the movie, well, first of all, if you could describe who Melzer is and his takes and what he knows about Assange. But it's also, they talk in the movie about how in court, the judge asked him his birthday, and he said, "Lady, I don't know." And so there was a real question of just how mad they have driven this guy. But as you say before, they let him out of solitary finally here. So I wonder if he's doing much better, if you're as worried about him as you were before, that kind of thing.
Yeah, certainly. We are always worried that Julian's not going to make it through this. We're all his whole family are all surrounding him, supporting him. We show that through the film as well. Stella's supporting him through these phone calls and visits to the prison, twice a week with the children. So we're doing all we can to really, support Julian to get through this, as is a whole, millions of people around the world. Whenever we meet some of Julian's old friends or tell him what we're up to and all the support that he has, that really keeps him going as well. Nils Melzer is the ex-UN Special Rapporteur on torture. So a special rapporteur is a sort of independent person, given a mandate by the UN to investigate torture around the world. So he usually works in places, authoritarian regimes, places where you would commonly expect persecution to exist, Azerbaijan or in the Caribbean or some places in Africa, and that's where he comes from, and that's his sort of mandate from the UN. And interestingly, and we show this in the film, that he had these biases to begin with as well. The demonization and the dehumanization of Julian that I talked about had worked its way into his biases as well, and he admits that now. He admits that he had been deceived by all these prestige media reports, about Julian, and that when he first received an email requesting his help from Julian's lawyers, that he dismissed it, saying, I don't want to get involved in this, not this Assange character. And it was his internal biases that were coming forward then. Then he got another email and he talks about that. And he said, well, maybe I should look into this and maybe I should investigate this. And really thought about why did he have this bias and where was it coming from? Where was this information coming from that led him to develop this bias? And then he started to dig into the case and really go into it. He's a Swedish speaker, and he was able to go through all the Swedish documents related to the Swedish investigation, which was, the longest running preliminary investigation in Swedish history. Open and closed 4 times, full of irregularities, leaks to media, and he was really able to go into that and really dig deeply into that and use freedom of information emails that were obtained from the UK prosecutors, one of which is very telling. It is the Swedish prosecutor writing to the UK prosecutor when Julian was in the Ecuadorian embassy, and the Swedish prosecutor is saying, "Oh, we want to get rid of this case, this investigation. It's gone on too long," and the UK prosecutor writes back to the Swedish prosecutor and says, "You're not getting cold feet. This is about more than a simple extradition." And so you have these sort of illuminating emails that exist about this, abusive process by the Swedish prosecutors and the British prosecuting service to keep Julian in the embassy.
Yep.
It wasn't about this investigation at all. It was a tactic to keep him in the embassy. And so Nils Melzer goes into all of that, and he's written a great book called The Trial of Julian Assange, which is really, if you read any book on the case, that's the one.
Yeah. I have, as soon as I'm done with my book, I have a pile of Assange books. I got Kevin Gastola's brand new book, and then there's the one by the great Italian journalist lady and Nils Melzer's book. We're going to do a whole, deep dive on Assange, but I'm kicking the can down the road because I'm behind on my own. Listen, one last thing, I have to go, but can you please tell me very quickly, did I read somewhere that the Australian government is finally kind of sticking their neck out here a little bit and hinting that they would prefer that he just be released to their care now?
Yeah, so the Australian Prime Minister has, made statements like enough's enough, and he doesn't see what purpose is served of Julian being in prison. He said he's made representations to the Biden administration. He will be meeting with Biden in San Diego on Monday, him and the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. So that's a perfect opportunity for these 3 people who are all involved in Julian's persecution to get together and bring this to a close. But yeah, he's advocating for Julian now, which is a huge change from previous governments, and really that stems from the support that Julian has in the Australian electorate, which is 88% of whom want Julian brought home.
That's great, and a great place to end it. Yep, it's public opinion at the end of the day. That's what counts. but the people have to be on the right side of these things, and they have to make their voices heard. Listen, sorry we're out of time. I got a million more questions for you here, but best of luck to you, and thank you so much for your great effort to free the hero, Julian Assange. Really appreciate it, Gabriel.
Cheers, Scott.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.